So I'm writing about Christian Science and New Thought. And Christian Science is not the same as Scientology, and people get them confused all the time. But Scientology is L. Ron Hubbard's religion created in the 1950s, has to do with aliens, and I'm not really sure what Tom Cruise, Xenu, all that stuff. And that's not what I'm writing about, although it is really interesting. But I'm writing about Christian Science, which was founded in 1879 by Mary Baker Eddy. She was a former invalid and homeopath who healed herself by, just reading the Bible, I guess. Like, she just read the Gospels and healed herself of a back injury that she thought would be possibly fatal. And then she set out to teach everyone else how they can heal themselves just by reading and reinterpreting the Gospels the way she did.
And these are just the regular Christian Bible.
Yeah, well, yeah, basically. I mean, the way she interpreted it, though, was she said that Jesus had been healing people centuries ago, so why can't we still heal each other now? Why not? I mean, he healed people through prayer, so maybe we should do that too. And she really believed she had cured herself and other people could cure themselves like Jesus had done, and that she didn't really believe he was a divine being so much as a great teacher who was there to show us the power within ourselves to heal. And, 19th century medicine was terrible, so I think people were hungry for anything that might help, even if it was just prayer,
So you think that was real, that the medicine was so bad that people were resorting to prayer, or that was just where it had always been that way, and prayer was a big function of the way people thought they got better?
Well, maybe a little of both, but I think 19th century medicine was pretty bad, especially if you were a woman. And the women who were attracted to Christian Science, first of all, Christian Science was predominantly a female religion, and women were drawn to it mainly because they were nervous invalids, like they had some kind of anxiety or depression, or we would call it that. They would have called it probably hysteria or neurasthenia back then. Or maybe they had migraines or some low-level psychological or physical condition that medicine had nothing to say about. Or maybe what their doctor would have done is put them in an asylum or given them a rest cure, which is where you had enforced bed rest and force feeding, and you had to gain like 20 pounds before they considered you healthy.
Good Lord, that was going on?
Yeah, that was pretty crazy stuff.
Like just on the fringes or?
No, that was mainstream. I mean, that was the number one treatment for nervous illness around that time in America, was for nervous women to be put to bed and fed a diet of milk and meat until they gained about 20 pounds on average, and then they were discharged as healthy.
Good Lord.
And no matter what their mental state was, it was just the weight gain was an index of health.
Can you even imagine if that was the prescription that a doctor wrote today?
Well, the craziest thing is, like, you look at the before and after pictures, and it's like the reverse of diets today, right? Like the after pictures. Well, to be fair, some of these women were anorexic, so for some of them, maybe it was the treatment they needed, right? But for other people, it was just, they had psychological problems. They didn't need to lie in bed all day eating meat and milk, and gaining 20 pounds. And some of them came out afterwards and were like, what have they done to me? Like, I look different, but I feel the same. And it's just, so it wasn't the greatest treatment in the world.
Confining somebody to bed rest when they're depressed wouldn't help me.
No. I mean, some people were really distraught when they were confined to bed rest and they were depressed, especially manic depressive people, which they didn't know much about manic depression back then. So like Virginia Woolf had the rest cure. She was probably manic depressive, and she wanted to kill herself when she had the rest cure. She was just made her miserable to have to lie in bed and eat so much when she felt like running around and not eating anything.
Right.
And so for some people, it was exactly the wrong method. Other people liked it. They didn't mind lying in bed and eating, but I think it was at best kind of ineffectual, right? And at worst, bad. So, and that was on the good end of the treatments. Like on the bad end, if you were a nervous invalid and you were a woman, they would remove your uterus or your ovaries because those were causing you to have hysteria, right? Like some people thought that was what caused mental illness in women.
Whoa.
So you could have like an invasive surgery, you could do this bed rest and force feeding thing, or you could go to an asylum. Or you could become a Christian Scientist and just pray yourself better. And so I think that's what a lot of people did, is they just said, well, screw these other treatments. They're so horrible.
Pretty big incentive to.
Yeah.
Wow. And so where does it go from her believing that she can heal herself, or having this experience where something really positive happened to her, to changing over to being is it a sect of Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that, although other Christians aren't really thrilled about Christian Science. But I do know some people who've gone from, say, another Christian sect to Christian Science and found it to be really helpful to them. And there's some things that Eddie was preaching that really spoke to people of her time, not just the prayer, but also the idea that spiritual matters are what's important and not the body, right? And I think that was something that people wanted to hear, in part because of what I talked about in my first book. They didn't want to be reduced to the sum of their neurochemical impulses, right? So they wanted to be seen as, divine and spiritual as opposed to earthly and bodily. So she was really speaking to a deep need. And this is kind of off the cuff because most Christian scientists are more conservative than this, but I actually know a gay man in West Hollywood who's a Christian scientist, and he converted to that because he just said it spoke to him. And this particular denomination or church that he's in is pretty liberal. They don't care that he's gay. They don't care that he goes to the doctor sometimes. They're not like...
They're the Methodist of Christian Science?
They're just laid back.
Okay.
They're the laid back Christian scientists.
So when I came home after hearing you talk about it, and you have way more interesting things in this, but I came home and watched some of the videos of people doing an introduction to Christian Science, and one of the things that struck me there was that it was a message of empowerment.
Yeah.
If only that it was, you should believe that the thing that's going on in your life right now doesn't have to be forever if you just commit yourself to changing it.
Yeah, sort of this idea of mind over matter, like you feel empowered to change your life and change yourself. And I think the most important thing I wanted to get across in my book is just, it's not just Christian Science. That's one sect of this much broader movement called New Thought, which is the secular side of this, which is just that idea that your thoughts have the power to change the world and change you and send you in a new trajectory. Like if you look at Oprah, for instance, like she's a big New Thought proponent. She's still promoting this in the present day without calling it New Thought. Or that book, The Secret, that came out in 2006, and sold like 30 million copies or something. I mean, it's just, people are still hungry for this idea that we're in control. We're in charge just through our thoughts. And I think we all know life doesn't necessarily work like that, right? But people want that message. So
for people that are not familiar with The Secret, what is the core message of that book?
Just the idea that if you wish for something and think about it a lot, it will happen to you. Like if you want to lose weight, just think about being skinny and you'll be skinny. Or if you want to overcome cancer, just think about curing your cancer and you'll get well.
Is that the way they would describe it? Would that be the definition that they would say, yeah, I agree with what she's saying there?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, I don't know if Rhonda Byrne is the person who wrote the book, and she basically says that in the opening pages of The Secret is like, yeah, just fixate on what you want and it will come to you. It's called the law of attraction.
That's right. The law of attraction. That's right.
And it sounds far-fetched, but people bought this book in droves and watched her movie and her documentary. And
I probably have had the book, The Secret, given to me 2 or 3 times and had many people tell me about it. Yeah. People
would give me like chicken soup for the soul. And that's kind of a similar thing, like positive, happy stories, feel good stories, not quite the same as The Secret, but I felt like it was kind of a similar vein.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. We would always read those books when we were sick as a kid. Yeah. That would be one of the books that you could get, that and Reader's Digest.
I don't think I ever actually read it, though, so I can't tell you actually what is in those Chicken Soup for the Soul books.
Oh, they're exactly what you're thinking. Yeah. They're like the Reader's Digest when people write in and tell a story about, some experience they had, some turning point, and how it got so much better.
Yeah, and I think people just like hearing those uplifting stories, and they think that it's good for you, like eating your vegetables, to hear things like this. And I think to a certain extent that's true, but it's also important to be realistic. This is one thing a major critic of New Thought called Barbara Ehrenreich has said, and she's also just a historian who's really well known, but she says, realism is what we need to focus on, not overly pessimistic thinking, not overly positive thinking, but just being in the middle, so that you recognize incoming threats, you can ward them off because that's what humans are supposed to do, but not get into an overly negative mindset either.
Well, it's interesting that you would that term realism is one, because in international relations, which is what I studied at the graduate level, realism is an actual philosophy on international relations, and it basically says whoever has the power does whatever they want.
Yeah.
And all of the international treaties that are going on, none of this exists without guns, essentially.
Wow.
And they say guns and money, and that anybody that thinks that other things that affect international relations are just in la la land. I mean, I don't know that all realists would say that, but if you boil it down, its power is absolute and it's the only thing that matters.
Well, that's kind of disturbing, but I mean, there is some truth to it. Like if you read Machiavelli, isn't that kind of his theory too? It's like, it's all about manipulating people by creating the impression that you have power and that you have, might makes right sort of thing. So, I mean, I don't know, positive thinking maybe is sort of benign compared to that, but you also want to be realistic in the sense that you acknowledge bad things that could potentially happen and take, preventative measures, right? Like an extreme example would be a man who is a Christian Scientist who didn't use a seatbelt because he thought, I'm going to think positive, no accident will happen to me, And this is an actual story I read in a book about Christian Science by a former believer who said her father would never wear seatbelts and he never let them wear seatbelts.
He never let his kids wear seatbelts.
He never let his kids wear seatbelts. And I thought, this is just foolish, right? Like anyone could see. I mean, even Mary Baker Eddy would probably, if she were alive when seatbelts were a thing, would probably say, wear your seatbelt. That's just, he took it way too far.
And how far does the religion ask for them to take it?
Well, okay, so Eddy courted controversy by saying that nobody could go to the doctor anymore, basically, because you had to really believe and to demonstrate your faith. You couldn't go to the doctor.
Well, that makes your disdain for this sound a little bit more clear. Because before it was like, these people are positive thinking and I don't like it. But if you're saying now this positive thinking goes to the extent that they are not going to seek medical care.
Well, and it depends on the sect. Like Christian Scientists forbid most kinds of medical care, although they do allow obstetrics, bone setting, and dentistry for various reasons. But they don't, like other New Thought sects are more open and they say you can go to the doctor, just also pray about it, So I think that's more realistic and more open and more helpful.
Thanks for watching this podcast short. You can find the rest of the interview on my channel. If you like this video, I hope you'll hit the like button and consider subscribing. I release a new interview with an interesting person every Wednesday morning.